Hey everybody. Recently did a video on the 10 fundamentals of full spectrum preparedness. And I want to have a conversation about each one of those fundamentals individually. Now, if you haven't watched that video, go ahead and pause the video, go to this link right up here, click on it, watch the video, and come back. For everybody else that's already watched the video, we're going to go on with the conversation. And the very first one we're going to talk about is food preparedness. So stick around and let's have that conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back to Grumpy Acres. Like I said, I want to break the 10 fundamentals out and I want to have an individual discussion about each one of them. The first video was more of a 100,000 foot top-down view of it. And we're gonna break down each one of those fundamentals and talk about the different aspects within each one. The first one we're going to do is food. Now, I said in that original video that the cognitive, mental, and spiritual fundamental, in my opinion, is probably the most important one in a survival situation. But I want to cover that after we cover the first three fundamentals that everybody gets into whenever they start prepping, and that's food, water, and shelter. So this first video is going to be about food preparedness. And it's not going to be a nuts and bolts on how to do stuff specifically. We're going to talk more in a higher level framework type of thing. And the whole idea behind these videos about each one of the fundamentals is they're going to give you a framework to build your preparation plan on and execute it. And then as time goes on, we'll start talking and we'll start doing nuts and bolts videos on each one of the aspects of the different fundamentals. But like I said, talk about food first. Now, there's a lot of people, and some of you may be watching this, and you may be one of these people. Nicole Sauce calls them woke preppers. And she doesn't mean woke in the sense of political correctness and stuff. What she means when she says that is somebody who's just awakening to what's going on and realizing the need to prepare. And food preparedness is probably one of the very first things that people get into. And as such, I think we need to talk about it at the front of the list and we need to break it down. So, very first thing we need to talk about is our existing food preparations. Now, when I do a homestead permaculture consultation, very first thing I put on the list for people to do is to get 6 months worth of food stocked up. And I know from a permaculture standpoint, people are kind of scratching their heads at times going, well, what's that got to do with permaculture? Well, here's the reason why you should have 6 months worth of food minimum stocked up. When you start putting your food production systems in place, your gardens, your animal husbandry, and all that stuff, it takes about 6 months before you get really productive to the point where you can start sustaining yourself off your garden or your animals. You know, give or take. I mean, that's a rule of thumb. And by having that 6 months worth of food stocked up, it gives you a cushion in case something goes wrong and it takes longer than 6 months, or it does take 6 months. You know, ideally you plant a spring garden and in 180 days, you're harvesting veggies and fruits. What happens if you have to start your countdown in the middle of winter, right? You have to make it through that hard time before you get to the spring to start planting. So having 6 months worth of food stocked up is very important. Now you can stock that up in any way you see fit. You can go out and buy commercial food, freeze-dried food. You can stack cans. You can buy in bulk and put them in 5-gallon buckets. There are a multitude of videos out there on the internet that show you how to do that, and I highly recommend. Even if you're a seasoned prepper or you've moved on into the homesteading realm, I highly recommend you go back from time to time and do a search on those and look at what's going on in that part of the community, because it will teach you things if you don't know it, and it'll reinforce and help you remember certain aspects of food stacking that you may have forgotten, or it slipped your mind. All right. So 6 months worth of food. That's the first one. Now, another aspect of existing food is what food do you have readily available? All right, and this, we do a lot of talking on this channel about living on property and living in a rural lifestyle. These aspects pertain to somebody that lives in the city or somebody that lives in the suburbs just as well. In a survival situation, you need to start thinking outside the box, all right? And existing food that you can readily get is very important. And I'm not talking about from a commercial standpoint. We'll talk about that, you know, markets and things like that later on. But right now, we're just talking about food that's readily available. You need to identify, do you have an established garden? Is there a garden established already on the property? You need to be able to identify existing fruit and nut trees. You know, apples, pears, peaches. You know, anything that may be on the property or in your vicinity. Now, when we moved onto this property, there were 2 pear trees and 3 apple trees and a peach tree and some plums and pawpaws that were already existing here. And the very first year that we lived here, we were able to pull fruit off of those. In fact, the pear trees were very abundant. There was so much fruit that we couldn't eat it all. Same with the apple trees. Once they were trimmed up, they produced like gangbusters. Now, you can do this in the city too. We lived in a small town. It was a bedroom community, and it was basically a suburb out in the middle of the country. I mean, seriously, that's what it was like. There were pear trees at the local supermarket. They had planted these pear trees along the road on the easement, and they were using them as decorations, but they were American pears, and they produced a buttload of pears every year. In fact, a couple of years, Yoda and my daughter would take the pickup truck down there, and they asked permission, since it was on the grocery store property. They went down there and they filled a Chevy 1500 bed up about that deep, full of pears. I mean, we got probably 3 or 4 bushels of pears off the trees that one year. And they, you know, once we moved out of that house and we were no longer up there constantly, there were years that nobody went up and picked those whatsoever. So you need to be looking for things like that. Look for fruit bushes. You can go out on walks in your neighborhood or on your property, and you can find all kinds of fruit-bearing bushes. Gooseberry, raspberry, blueberry, blackberry. They grow wild. Be on the lookout for them. One of the things that's real important in modern self-sufficiency is, well, the definition of modern self-sufficiency is being able to take care of as many problems as possible that you're confronted with the tools, materials, and skills you have on hand. Learning to identify these wild edibles is a skill that you need to cultivate, even if you're homesteading. No, I'm going to say even more importantly, if you're homesteading and you're living on property, you need to go out and be able to identify edible plants on your property. So go take a class, get a book, and read about it, and learn what's on your property and what's edible in your area and what's not. You know, and it makes for a fun pastime too. All right, so go find those existing fruit and nut trees, find those fruit-bearing bushes, and find all those edible plants that are in your area. If you live in the city, you can do this too. I guarantee you, if you're probably within walking distance of a park, and you go to the park and look around the fringes of the park, I guarantee you can find all kinds of edible stuff that people look at weeds and they just ignore. And the last part of existing food preparedness is identifying what game animals are in your area. You know, we live on about 12 acres, and we've got basically a deer highway that runs along the back of the property, and there are constantly deer moving back and forth back there. We've got rabbits and we've got squirrel, and we've got small game here. If you live in the city or the suburbs, you're not going to have access to that much stuff, but you're still going to have access to it. You've got squirrels are prolific in the city. Rabbits are prolific in the city. You need to be able to identify where they are, and you need to figure out a way to either trap or kill them. And you know, again, start thinking outside the box. Put out live traps for squirrels if you don't want to shoot them. and dispatch them by hand. If you live in the city, you're not going to be able to shoot a firearm. You're not going to be able to shoot them with a gun. Go buy a pellet rifle. I've got a Beeman pellet rifle that's in .22 caliber that shoots at the same velocity as what you get from the regular bulk box ammo, .22 Winchesters. It's almost the same exact velocity, and it will kill at 50 yards. It will kill an animal just as dead as a .22 shot from a rifle. All right, so be looking to think about that. You know, think about all this existing stuff that's there that nobody thinks about, and incorporate that into your preparedness plan. You know, you're not going to be able to live off of what's existing on your property. These people that say, "Oh, I'm going to go out and I'm going to live in the woods and that's how I'll survive if something happens." We don't want to just survive. We want to thrive. So these are just one part of your food preparedness plan. All right. The next thing we want to look at, we've identified the existing food production on our property or near us, right? The next thing we want to talk about or think about is what kind of food production can be supported in the future? What can I do in the immediate that will help my food situation, all right? And what am I looking for? Some examples. It's the potential to grow food. Let's call it that, the potential to grow food. Number one, do you have a space big enough for a garden? You may live on a property that is completely treed and you don't have any space for a garden. You know, there's no sunlight coming in. You're going to have to identify a way to be able to create a garden of some sort. You may have to cut trees down. If you live on a property that's really sloped, you may have to consider terracing that property, and we'll talk about that in just a second. The other thing about your property that you need to look at where you are is the ground suitable, right? If you're living in the city, you know, you may have a backyard that gets lots of sunlight, but the soil, whenever they build those houses, they disturb the soil, and it really turns it up bad, and that soil may be really depleted, and in a lot of places you're just going to have dirt, and all dirt is soil that's dead. And you may have to bring that soil back to life through amendments and fertilizing and stuff like that. So look at the fertility of where you are, and you know, we live in the Midwest, and our property, we in our individual case are very fortunate that we live in a river bottom, and we've got 12 inches of black topsoil on most of the property. And it's very fertile, and you can throw a seed down in most places and it'll grow. But there's places that we're going to have to rehab it because they've done certain things in the past. They've compacted it. They've done that. But what if you live in the desert? You know, rocky ground. You have to look at that. And that kind of brings us to the next thing, is water. Is there a water source close by? I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I think water preparedness on a homestead and in people's preparedness plans is probably the most underprepared thing there is. And the reason I say that is because this summer we didn't have any rain catchment set up. We had no way to catch rain, so we were running solely off of rural water. And it was an extremely hot year, and it took a lot of water every single day to make the garden productive and keep the animals going. So, you know, we need to, is there city water, rural water? Do you have access to water? What happens if that water goes away? Do you have rain catchments in place? Is there a pond or a lake nearby where you can haul water if you need to, or pump water out of it if you need to? You know, these are all things that are going to affect future potential food production on your property. So we need to look at that. And once we've identified any potential food production that can happen on the property, then we need to start thinking about infrastructure changes. What infrastructure is existing, and what changes do we have to make in order to start our food production, all right? So infrastructure is very important, and I learned that Over the last year, it came into focus for us because when we got here, there was zero infrastructure, and between having to go to a JOB and having to clean this place up and having to do improvements on the house, infrastructure on food production is woefully inadequate here still, yeah, even after a year. We made a lot of strides on it, but we've got a lot more we need to do. So some of the infrastructure things that we can think about. First and foremost, compost. Having a compost pile. Doesn't matter if you live in an apartment or you live in suburbia or you live on property. You can put up a compost pile someplace. If you're in an apartment, you're going to do composting in a big tote with a lid on it. You can do the composting on your balcony or on your patio, and you can compost there. If you've got a little tiny postage stamp yard, you can get a compost tumbler and you can do it there. If you live in suburbia, you can have a bigger one. You're not going to need a great big huge one, but you know, I had one that was made out of, let's see, it was 2 wood pallets wide and 1 wood pallet deep on each end, and then it had, I'm sorry, it was 3 wide because there were 2 pallets on the front. And all I did was I put all the biomatter on one side, and once that filled up, about every other day I would go out and I would flip it over to the other side. And within 21 days, I had really good compost that I could amend my soil with. So you could do it. You can do it in an apartment for your container gardening. You can use one of those totes. You could build a bigger one on your suburban lot. If you're living out in the country, our compost pile now, I turn it with the skid loader. I can go out and turn it by hand if I want, but it takes about 45 minutes, where I can turn it with the skid loader in about 5 at the most. You know, that's from the time getting into the skid loader to the time I'm parking the skid loader. You know, so, you know, one of the benefits of having property is you can scale everything up much larger and do things on a much larger scale, which leads to much more abundance, all right? And if you're living in an apartment or you're living in a house in suburbia, personally, I think the goal should be to graduate from the apartment to the house, and from the house to the rural property. I mean, and that's becoming a homesteader. We've talked about it before. Becoming a homesteader is the ultimate goal, or it should be the ultimate goal of every prepper. All right, from where you start, you should be looking for homesteading, because homesteading is the ultimate expression of preparedness. You've got everything you need. Within reason. I mean, there's certain things you can't produce yourself, but we'll talk about that in just a second. So you can do that. Next piece of infrastructure you can make, a permanent greenhouse. We built our greenhouse this year, and very first year it was not as productive as it could have been because there was a learning curve, and you know, if you let it get away from you, it gets, in the summertime it gets too hot, in the wintertime it gets too cold. So we're still learning how to make that productive, and we're hoping this fall, November, December timeframe, we can get some stuff going on in there so that come late February, we're able to start food production early and get it going. But you don't need a big greenhouse like we've got. You can build a small greenhouse. You can build a little hoop house out of PVC pipe and plastic in your backyard. You can buy, if you're in an apartment, they've got little tiny, they're PVC tube and plastic greenhouses, and they're like 3 foot by 3 foot by like 5 foot tall, and you can grow stuff in there if you need it. But look for some sort of greenhouse. The next thing is functional stables, barns, pens, and coops. Protein production is in a survival situation, if you're living in the wilderness, and historically, one of the biggest hurdles that people have faced in survival is protein production. And, you know, if you're living in a large community, there's no way that a large community can go out and hunt enough meat to provide production. So you get into animal husbandry. And, you know, it runs the gamut between things as large as cows all the way down to quail, very small quail, or guinea pigs. You know, start thinking outside the box as far as food production. If you're living on a rural property, naturally you're going to think about the larger animals, the pigs, the cows, the sheep, the goats, and everything that they can produce. But you can look for smaller animals too. The chickens are an essential part of a homestead. Rabbits become an essential part of the homestead. We shut down our rabbit production when we moved, and I think this winter we're going to start building the infrastructure so in the springtime we can get rabbits and start rabbit production up again. At the very least, they could act as food for your dogs, your working dogs. So you've got that. And if you live on a suburban lot, I mean, when we lived on ours, we were raising quail. I did quail. I started with about 20 quail, and it took about 5-6 years before they all died off from old age and illness and such. But I did that, and we learned how to do fowl by using these quail, and they were in a 6-foot by 3-foot by 3-foot pen outside. In the wintertime, I put a heat lamp on them to keep them from freezing to death, and they flourished. They did really well. I never did have any eggs that hatched because we were pulling them and actually eating them. But they're small. They've got a small footprint, and then you can graduate up to rabbits. If you live in an apartment, you can have a couple of rabbits. All right, it's not really 100% efficient. It's not the best situation, but you can make it work if you have to. If food protein production is really high on your list, you can make it work that way. In suburbia, I said we raised the quail. We also had rabbits. I had them in hutches, and we had 2 does and a buck. And if you do it properly and you schedule the breeding program properly, 2 does and a buck can make about 200 pounds of meat every year for you. And we graduated. I wanted to do an experiment in living in colony, putting them in a colony and basically letting them run free in a great big pen. And I did that, and the rabbit explosion, the rabbit population just exploded because I did not have them on a regulated breeding program. And at one point on a suburban lot, we had 60 rabbits in a little 10 by 10 cage. It was multiple levels, and there was all kinds of there was more than enough room for them in there, and protein production just exploded for us. In fact, it got to be where it was probably a little too much for what we had going on, but it was a good experiment in it. But you can do it, But in order to have these animals, you have to have functioning barns, stables, pens, and coops. So be looking at that. Your backyard coop is just as important as the great big monstrous semi-commercial size coop that I'm trying to build. Another part of livestock is fences. Having fencing available. You need to have livestock-proof fencing up. Because I'm telling you what, cows like leaning on things, and they will bust through a fence quicker than anything. And goats are escape artists. If there's a hole they can crawl through, they will go through it. So we need to have livestock-proof fences, and it's not only to keep them in, it's to keep other things out too. We want to keep predators out. If you're living in the city, you're going to have coons. Well, if you're in the country too, you're going to have these problems too. But it's very exacerbating in the city because it's not something you think about. You have coons and feral cats that will get into your pens and kill your chickens and your rabbits and things like that. So we need to have livestock and predator-proof fences up for our things, and we need to be thinking about that whenever we're looking at property, whenever we're graduating up a level in property. Another thing that infrastructure improvements that we can think about is permaculture items, permaculture features, swales, terrace, cropland, things like that. If you're living on a suburban lot, in an apartment, it's going to be kind of hard to put some sort of big permaculture feature in. You can do small ones, do permaculture inside your apartment on your balcony, your patio or such. But once you start getting up into larger, you know, like the quarter-acre yard or land, you can start doing more permaculture. And you know, you're in suburbia, you can put a swell around the edge of your property to capture water that's running off your house and get it into the ground. You know, you've got your rain catchment fills up, and then it goes onto the ground. You can try capturing the water a little bit and getting it to hydrate your ground before it flows off your property. Like I said earlier, if you're living on a piece of property that's extremely hilly, you know, it's got a slope like this. Billy Bond over at Permapasture Farms has a great example of what's going on with something like that. You know, he's clearing the land and he's building terraces on a hillside. He's making that land that traditionally would not be very productive. He's turning it into very productive things. Another permaculture feature that you could do is a food forest, and this is really great. If you're living in an apartment or in a suburb, you can do a little bit of guerrilla gardening. And what guerrilla gardening is you find some place that doesn't have a garden and you plant seeds there. You just plant seeds there. You find a crop that will grow and is extremely hardy and will grow in that location, and you just plant it there and you just let nature take its course. And you can make seed bombs and put seed bombs out. You know what? I'm going to do a video on making seed bombs. I mean, it's kind of guerrilla gardening is kind of a cool idea, and it's kind of neat. So we'll do a video on that at some point about guerrilla gardening and making seed bombs. But you could do food forests at a local park. You do a food forest in your backyard if you're in your suburbia. You can do on your property in your zone 3 where you don't go to very often. You can do a food forest there, and just let nature run its course. And you know, you could bring it into your zone 2 and your zone 1 if you want to. But yeah, you've got all kinds of opportunities with the permaculture features, from swells to terraces to food forests, all kinds of different ways you can get food production going or help food production. The next one, stocked ponds and lakes. If you have a pond on your property or a lake on your property, and it's not stocked, you should think about stocking it, because the fish in that pond can grow and be a source of protein for you. I will tell you this, it's very expensive to stock a pond. You guys, if you haven't seen our pond rehab video, go watch it and see how small that is. It cost us $300 to stock that, and those fish are probably dead now because I did not get an aerator in there. So, you know, we have to follow through on things. We're going to find out. I've got something to aerate it now, and we're going to get it in place, and we'll see how well everything does next spring. But a stocked pond or lake is a great infrastructure for food production. And then finally, waterfowl improvements. If you live on a property that has some wetlands, you can build a dike and blind system for basically what a dike and blind system is. It's a way to improve a property so you can hunt waterfowl. And what it is it's a system of dikes that you can open and close and flood different fields and areas, you know, raising the water level or lowering the water level so that you can attract waterfowl so you can hunt them and get them as a source of protein. You know, it's something to think about. There was a piece of property about 30 miles south of us at our old place where they had actually gone in, and it was about 50 acres of dikes and blinds, and it was probably one of the premier waterfowl hunting properties in the state of Missouri, and it was really just a beautiful property, and they just did a fantastic job on it. It was actually a duck hunting club that owned it, and their clubhouse was a great big Morton barn with the sliding doors like that, and they built a glass wall where that opening was, and they could open up those doors, and it looked out across the property on all the ponds and everything, and it was just, like I said, it was just gorgeous. But you don't have to do something like that. You can do something small, of course. Okay, so we talked about our initial food preparation. We talked about potential for growing food and food production on our property. We talked about existing food on our property, and we talked about infrastructure improvements on our property. The last thing we need to talk about when it comes to food preparedness is food preparation and storage. Doesn't do us any good to have all this food available for us, all these fruits and vegetables and nuts and protein. Doesn't do us any good to have that available if we don't have a way to prepare it, store it, and cook it. All right. So let's talk about some of the aspects of that when it comes to food preparedness. First off, your kitchen. Naturally, you should have a functioning kitchen. You should configure your kitchen with food prep and storage and cooking in mind. If you have the ability to remodel your kitchen, if it's not optimal and you have the ability to do it, spend the money on it. It's well worth it. It's an investment. We did that at our old house. We spent quite a bit of money on redoing the kitchen to make it a canner's kitchen. We put in extra deep countertops. We put in a pot filling spigot above the stove, which is really nice because Yoda's got that 45-quart canner, which is next to impossible to move when it's full of water because it weighs about 80 pounds. But just configure it. You know, you've got extra large cabinets for storing all your stuff for your kitchen pantry. You know, you should have a kitchen pantry. We'll talk about pantries here in just a second. You know, you should have your kitchen set up so you can do the things you want to do. Once you've got your existing kitchen up, think about supplemental kitchens. There's a summer kitchen. So the summer kitchen is a kitchen that's built away from the main building. It's used in the summertime, and the whole idea behind it is it gets hot out there. You know, it's naturally ventilated. You build that building like that, so it's naturally ventilated, so you can cook out there, and so your house doesn't heat up. And it helps whenever things are okay like they are now, and the electricity's on, and you've got AC. It really helps because your AC does not have to work as hard at cooling the house as when you're cooking and heating the house up in the summertime. If things go bad and there's no electricity, you know, because we're always thinking about those probabilities and possibilities. If things go bad, if you've got a summer kitchen, it's not going to make living in the house miserable. We tried living as much as possible without the AC this summer, and Yoda was doing canning and cooking, and it made it next to impossible to be in the house. Once July rolled around, it would get like 95 degrees inside the house, 95, almost 100 degrees at times, and we had to turn the AC on in order to be able to live comfortably. All right. Another kitchen you can think about is a processing kitchen. Having a second kitchen in place inside the house where you can do your canning and your bulk food preparation away from the main kitchen. And the reason why that's handy is when you're canning or you're jerking meat or you're dehydrating, you're freeze drying, that takes up a lot of space, and it can be extremely messy and cluttering. And having a separate space to do that in, makes that function easier, and it also keeps your regular kitchen from being cluttered up and getting in the way of regular food preparation and cooking and all that. So that, you know, having a processing kitchen, if you have the ability to put one in. You know, we lived in a front back split. I'm sorry, not the front back split. We lived in a ranch with a basement, you know, in it. And our processing kitchen, I took a corner of the basement and I put a stove in there, and I put a great big stainless steel countertop on some cabinets that I saved whenever we remodeled, and it had a sink down there to begin with. So I just turned that into a little processing kitchen. That's where we did all our freeze drying, and I did all my brewing for my beer and my distilling and winemaking, and you know, there was a little bit of canning that went on down there before the canning kitchen got put in place. But so, you know, you can do it if you're on a suburban lot. You can do something like that if you've got the space. Just start thinking outside the box and utilizing that space to your benefit. Pantries. Having a pantry as far as food storage goes is paramount. And we like breaking ours up into 3. So we've got our kitchen pantry. That is the food storage. There's a special place in the kitchen. In this house, it's a little closet. In the old house, it was a rack in the laundry room next to the kitchen, and in a couple of the cabinets. That's where we keep all the stuff that we need on a daily basis to prep food and prepare food and cook food. So there's your kitchen pantry. And then the next one, we called it the ready pantry. And this was a little bit larger area where we kept stuff that we wouldn't need every day, but we could get to it as easily as possible. Okay, and it was down the hallway. And in this house, we really don't have one yet. I'm hopefully in the next month or 2, we're going to have our pantry system set up the way we want. But your ready pantry just allows for more storage being readily available if you're cooking and you're needing it on an immediate basis, and it's not in the way in your kitchen. And then you've got your storage pantry. And your storage pantry is where you put all your long-term preparations, your canned goods. You know, you're making case after case of canned goods. It's where you store that. It's where you store food processing equipment that you don't use on a regular basis, like the sausage stuffers, the grinders, the meat slicers, you know, all that stuff that you need like once every quarter, once a month maybe. You know, you get those out of the way, and it's just a place where you can buy in bulk, which saves you money. You know, there's economy in size, and then you can buy in bulk and you can store everything there, and then pull it out as you need it, and then you can replenish the pantry. And so the way it works is the food goes from your kitchen pantry to the table, the food goes from the ready pantry to the kitchen pantry, and then the food goes from the storage pantry to the ready pantry. And so you're always restocking one from the other and rotating first in, first out. And we'll talk about food rotation here in another video. Speaking of rotations, pantry improvements. If you've got existing pantries, things like can rotation systems. Those are first in, first out systems where you put a can in, it rolls down, and that's the first one you take out, and it just automatically feeds a can to you every time you take one out. It allows you to, number one, rotate your food stock very easily. Number 2, it allows a very easy way to check how much you have, your availability, whether you need to go restock on something or not. But it's can rotation systems. Shelving. Think about the shelving that you have in your pantry. A shelving unit like this, if your space, this is all you got room for, this would be a fine one to do. You can't store much stuff on it, but if it's all you can do is that's what you got to deal with. You want bigger shelving. You can custom build shelves if you need to. I've seen some videos where guys built great big huge racks that were able to store all their food on it very easily. When we get the storage pantry done, we've got existing shelving units that we're going to be able to use, but I'm going to have to think about either purchasing more or building some specifically for our needs in the new storage pantry. But these are things you can think of for pantry improvements. And then the next thing we're talking about, we talked about the summer kitchen as a separate building from the house. There's some other buildings you can build that will help in food preparation if you've got the space for it. And you can do this on a suburban lot. If you're in an apartment, you really can't do this because you have to have land available. But if you've got a plot of land where you can build a small building, you can do this. A smokehouse. We've got that smoker trailer you guys have seen if you watch the videos. You've seen us use the smoker trailer. We've got that, but I want to build a proper smokehouse where we can do several hundred pounds of meat at one time. We could hang an entire side of a pig and cold smoke it if we want. We could hang hams in it. So a smokehouse is something to think about. A brewery or a distillation house or whatever you want to call it. A building where you can do your brewing and everything off away from the main building. Again, in the summertime, it keeps it from getting hot because it does involve fire and heating stuff up, and it does get hot. But it also gives you a place where you can consolidate everything and do everything in one place and be able to temperature control it better than in the house. It's not cluttering up the house and all that stuff. So start thinking about these other buildings, and I said you could do it on a suburban lot. You could build a brew shed out of one of those portable buildings, one of those 8x10 portable buildings. You could build a perfectly usable and functional brew shed or distillery in a building like that. You could build a smokehouse out of cinder blocks and wood. The footprint on that is only about 4 foot by 4 foot is all you need for something that size. And I guarantee you your neighbors, unless they're some crazy person, are going to love the smell of you smoking meat as it wafts through the neighborhood. These are just things to think about as far as food production and storage goes. The final thing I want to talk about, I mentioned it earlier, access to commercial food. When we're living in good times like right now, and the infrastructure's in place and society's nominally functioning on a regular basis, we need to have access to commercial food, grocery stores, restaurant depot type of things, farmers markets. Whenever we're looking for a property, we need to ensure that we're not someplace where we're in a complete food desert. If you're in the city, that's a real concern. There are places in major cities where grocery store chains have just quit the area because the losses have been too high through thievery and vandalism and things like that. And so you want to live someplace where you can get to commercial food. A lot of these things I've talked about came from an evaluation sheet that me and a couple other people worked on. So we were trying to build a tool for Yoda when she was a real estate agent that she could plug numbers into and try to get a numerical representation of how good a piece of property was from a prepper homesteading standpoint. And so access to commercial food, we came up within 15 to 20 miles of at least 2 grocery stores as being optimal. And the reason being is if the infrastructure goes out in one place, you want to back up. Always, 1 is none, 2 is 1, right? So you want to be optimally within 15 to 20 miles driving distance of a grocery store or something like that. Now, I know what somebody's saying. Well, I feel it's better to live way off the beaten path, 45 minutes from the nearest town, anything. And I'm not dismissing that. There are benefits, but there's also drawbacks for living that far out. Simple fact is, as far as food preparation goes, you're not going to be able to produce everything you need on your property. Even the early settlers. The reason towns sprang up is because they provided a focal point for trading and getting the things that they needed, like sugar, salt, spices that don't grow in the area. So, you need to think about that. And yes, you're getting an added benefit for being further away from some place that would have a grocery store, but you're also having some difficulty isn't the right word. There's also some drawbacks, and looking at realistically, you'll understand what I mean. And it's a personal choice. It really is. I'm not saying if you don't live within this area or within a certain radius of grocery stores that it's a bad thing. What I'm saying is from a preparedness standpoint, it's optimal, right? Farmers markets. Having a farmer's market nearby is a great preparation thing because it allows you to get fresh food, fresh produce, stuff that you may not be able to grow. You may have a crop failure, so you need to be able to get that. And that brings us to the last thing: community. You hear us talk about this all the time. In the fundamentals of food preparedness, community is very important for the very reason I mentioned why access to commercial food is important too. You may not be able to produce everything that you need, but if you get 4 or 5 families and they're all producing big gardens, you know, I don't care if you're in the suburbs or if you're in the city or if you're rurally. If you've got a circle of people and they're all gardening and they're all pointed in the same direction, like-minded, something that you may not raise, you can get from somebody that does, right? And you can trade the abundance, which is one of the permaculture things. We share our abundance. So I get an overabundance of tomatoes. I share them with somebody that has an overabundance of peppers, and they share their peppers with me. We share our pears and our apples. We share this, and it just creates having a community in place is just so important to just the whole preparedness aspect. It's so important that it is its own fundamental in full spectrum preparedness, right? Some ideas in the city. You know, you may think, well, I live in an apartment. I don't have a place to garden. What about finding a neighbor maybe that does have a space to garden in? Become friends with them and see about gardening on their plot, creating a garden on them. If you get 4 or 5 families in a 5 or 6 block radius that are gardening, they each create. Say, okay, let's say this. You got 5 families. They create a 300 square foot garden each. That's 1,500 square feet of gardening space. That is a lot of space, and you can produce a lot of food on that. And if you're coordinating and you're working together, you can cover a majority of your food needs right there as far as fruits and vegetables go. So it's something to think about. Suburbia, same thing. Think about those people that live in your neighborhood. Find the people that garden. Go talk to them. Strike up friendships with them, and try to build a community there. You know, you live there, get to know your neighbors. Live out in the country, get to know your neighbors. You know, if you're in the city, your neighbor may be in the apartment next door. You're in the suburbs, you know, they're 100 feet away. Our nearest neighbor is almost a quarter mile. Well, not quite that far, but you get the point. You get the point. You know, it's a matter of distance, and it's just how much effort you're going to put into building your community. All right. I think we've covered most of the aspects of food preparedness as looked at through full spectrum preparedness. If you have any ideas or any thoughts about what I said, anything that I may have missed that you think is pertinent to the conversation, go ahead and put it in the comments below, man. I want to share your experiences. That's what this whole journey is about. This whole journey is about sharing our experiences. And we not only want to share our experiences, we want you to share your experiences with us. So go ahead and put it down in the comments, what you think about the whole fundamentals of food preparation. If you like this video, go ahead, hit the thumbs up. Let YouTube know that you enjoyed it and this is the type of content that you like to see. If you've subscribed, go ahead and hit that notification bell so you know when we drop more of these full spectrum videos talking about the different fundamentals in a little bit deeper detail. If you've got any requests, anything that you would like to see about the actual nuts and bolts about food preparation, go ahead and post that down in the comments below. I mean, like I said, there are a multitude of videos out there showing you how to stack food and can and do all this stuff. But we are more than happy to make videos on doing these things for you guys. It's something Yoda enjoys being in the kitchen on the other side of the homestead and making videos for you. And you know, I enjoy talking about the whole preparedness thing. So, you know, we'll be more than happy to do that. Just let us know what you want, and we'll work it into the rotation. Okay. Give these things a thought. Do an evaluation of where you are on the spectrum of food preparedness and look to the future. Don't worry about where you were. Think about where you are and where you're going to be. All right? Until next time, go live life debt-free. Thanks, Milo.